Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Disclosure in the Media. This is going to be uh, another Elder Scrolls installation with Ryan Palenkarts again today. Uh, this is one going to be about the life of Talos. This is the second installment of the life of Talos, or Tiber Septim. So take it away, Ryan.
Okay, so in the last episode, we talked about General Talos and his rise up with Admiral Rickton and how, not Admiral, Culhane to become the man sitting on the Ruby Throne after Culhane's untimely assassination. Culhane can be tentatively viewed as Emperor Zero of the Third Era Empire, the dynasty of the Septums. Because basically Tiber Septim served him as a general, and then when he died, he had no heirs, and Tiber Septim assumed the throne. Tiber Septim again cannot dragon shout anymore. He, in the same assassination attempt on Culhane, was they had attempted to assassinate him as well, or he cut his own throat because there is a bit of a controversy as to if Tiber Septim himself was responsible for Culhane's assassination. There's no definitive answer, and I wouldn't go into it, but Tiber Septim was a man of great ambition, so it's not beyond possibility. Now we have Tiber Septim sitting on the Ruby Throne. He is in control of the Colovian estates as well as most likely Falkreath Hold in Skyrim, in southern Skyrim. He is a young and ambitious ruler. However, he again can't speak in more than a soft voice now. He, however, is ready to make a name for his empire. So to get into this, we will talk about his conquests in this video and the beginning of the Third Empire under Tiber Septim. And to get into it, so basically, Tiber Septim at this point is controlling this southern area of Skyrim, basically down to where this big mountain is. Not all the way over to Riften yet, but then most of central Cyrodiil, Kvatch area, and down to Anvil is likely not with him yet, as well as the southern area down here, Leyawiin, Blackwood, Bravil. That area has always had some very independent leanings and has oftentimes tried to break away from the Empire. During times of turmoil and strife, like after the Oblivion Crisis, Leyawiin famously broke away and created its own small state, only to be reincorporated later. And none of the other provinces have any allegiance to him at this point. But because Tiber Septim was Dragonborn, and the Nords are notoriously, they view the Dragonborn in the same sort of way that the Imperials do, as like their leader. They pledge their support, likely with little to no bloodshed. If there was, it was independent leaders that did not want to give up their autonomy. But like for the most part, the average Nords were with him. So Skyrim is pacified very early, and it's if it was even pacified with force. Um, so then Tiber Septim's view is that he should pacify the human kingdoms first, the human provinces first, because it would be easier. So his next view is on High Rock, because High Rock at this time, as we've talked about many, many times, was a collection of city-states that were always vying for control over the peninsula of High Rock, as well as the rest just making small kingdoms. They were very disjointed, very weak, and the Imperial Legion with the Nords' newfound loyalty, as well as the forces that he had from Cyrodiil, easily just swept through most of these city-states, with only the larger ones like Daggerfall, Wayrest holding out. Wayrest, being a port city, did very well for a time in keeping the Imperial legions out. We'll talk about how it snuffed out, but first we need to move down to Leyawiin and Anvil. So with the new Imperial legions from Skyrim as well, Anvil and Kvatch were easily taken, as well as Leyawiin and Bravil. These areas were fringe parts of Cyrodiil, but they still had largely Imperial populations, but they were populations that did not view Tiber Septim as greatly like compelling. So he easily conquered them. These are very little written about in the lore conquests. I mean, it was basically putting down governments that had no loyalty to him. So to get into Wayrest, and Daggerfall falls after a prolonged siege, and Wayrest, it takes Admiral Rickton to out navy the Wayrest fleet in the bay here in this area down here. And once he does that, the city falls. He actually lands at their protected dock, and his troops take the city. And Admiral Rickton will go on to be one of Tiber Septim's greatest military people. And so he gets such an ego about himself, and he's this like fat, portly man who you have to deal with a lot in the Elder Scrolls Redguard game, which is like a linear platforming like game.
Mhm.
He he wears a fake version of the Amulet of King because he views himself as so important. And there are a lot of old pictures from that era of the Elder Scrolls lore where it'll be like him pandering next to Tiber Septim on the Ruby Throne, and it's the only time you see him without like a big fake Amulet of Kings on is when he's right next to Talos. He he's widely known as a very corrupt man. He was very willing to just like live a life of luxury while like letting his troops kind of rot. But he was instrumental in Tiber Septim's conquest in the beginning. He kind of becomes quite low in the court though going forward. Once Tiber Septim makes some very powerful allies abroad, or with then and then in his empire because they join his empire. But in the beginning, Admiral Rickton is very important.
Mhm.
So the conquests of Hammerfell come next. So High Rock, Skyrim, and Cyrodiil are in there. Hammerfell is the next. Now Hammerfell is ruled by two groups: the Forebears and the Crowns. The Crowns are traditionalists and isolationists. They don't like being tied down in other areas. The Forebears, on the other hand, are willing to work with other people. And they were at civil war at this period because a king had died. The High King, who usually it's usually the leader of one of these groups whenever the last one dies and his line dies. And that's what had happened. So they were at civil war to decide it. And Cyrodiil, Tiber Septim basically played off this weakness. So what had happened was the Crowns and the Forebears were at war. The Forebears and made an alliance with the Legion. They came in, they helped them. They defeated the Crowns. And the Forebears tried to keep independence. So Tiber Septim turned on them. And I think it was a couple years later. It was more like the Forebears wouldn't listen to what Tiber Septim's government had to say, like fully. So they came back with the legions. What had happened was there was a battle at Stros Mukai, which is down here, this little island where the Yakutan Navy and the Imperial Navy fought a great battle. And it looked like the Imperial Navy was going to lose. Admiral Rickton himself was leading the Imperial Navy, but it looked like they were going to lose until Tiber Septim called up his secret weapon, Nifel Alargus, the Red Dragon. Some people call him the Red Dragon of the Imperial Court at this time. And basically, he set fired all these ships that the Forebears were using, and it won the battle for the Imperials. After this, the Red Dragon is known to have kind of just moved all over, helping Tiber Septimus in his conquests. However, we will get back to the Red Dragon later because it may be a possible origin as to how Tiber Septim did a certain thing. So, but right now, the Red Dragon had just helped Tiber Septim pacify Hammerfell, even though it fully didn't. And agreements were made between the Imperial government and the Hammerfellian factions to make Hammerfell more in partnership with the Empire than it was a full member state. It was a full member state. It was still within the Imperial economic world and still drew legions from there. However, it was more a client kingdom in the beginning, and then it assimilated further later on as it became clear that there was really no other place to do business. And but they at this point they were fully in partnership, and the Red Guards viewed themselves in partnership going forward forever. And that's why when the White Gold Concord was signed during the Great War in the Fourth Era, and it was ceding lands in Hammerfell to the Aldmeri Dominion, they broke away fully. They were like, "No, you voided our contract, and we are no longer with you, but we'll help you with." And they continued to fight the Dominion quite successfully for many years. So now we are going to get into the Legion. So now the Legion is swelled with the races of men, and Tiber Septim knows that the beast folk are going to be the next easiest conquests. The elves are not good to touch, and largely because the Aldmeri Dominion of the Alliance War era is no longer fully in control of this southern region. Elsewhere is kind of moved off by itself. The Khajiit have always kind of had this view where they'll join alliances if they need them in the moment, but as soon as they're not useful, they're no longer in them. Valenwood and Somerset, however, are still very closely linked at this point. And Morrowind is viewed as suicide to invade just because of the treacherous volcanic landscape and the sheer uh like dedication of its people to the Tribunal Temple, and they're the Marin gods of Morrowind. And so they are, it's viewed as just suicide to go. And plus, the Telvanni wizards are absurdly powerful, and there's more of them than there are Imperial battle mages. Because the Telvanni are an entire clan of people that just study magic. And even though they're not very big in Morrowind politics, they hate anything that disrupts what they're doing. And if an invasion of the Imperials come, they're going to deal with it. They're also notoriously racist, so they hated the fact that even later when they were part of the Empire, that they were in the Empire. So it's quite clear that the Telvanni would have been a big issue if an invasion of Morrowind were to take place.
Mm-hmm.
But to deal with Elsver and Black Marsh, Black Marsh was easy. You just hold the outer swamps. Let the Argonians have the inner swamps. They're suicide anyway. They're riddled with disease and beasts of unimaginable strength. And basically, unless you had a group of Argonians, you're not going into the inner swamps in Argonia. So the inner kingdom, places like Hellstrom, they never were fully imperialized. They remained the kings. They remained under the kingdom of Argonia, but holding the outer regions of Black Marsh is all Tiber Septim had to do. It's what Remen did in the Second Empire, and what part of the First Empire did with places like Stormhold, Gideon, and Soul Rest, as well as Black Rose, Lilmoth, Archean, and Thorn. Those are all places that Tiber Septim took over. The First Empire really only held the stuff on the western side of Black Marsh, and then the Second Empire did do the same. They just held the outer swamps and waited, and that's all they had to do. That's really all you could do. Going even further, even with legions from all over the rest of the empire, likely would have killed you off, because plagues are rampant in this center area for all races other than Argonian. In fact, Lilmoth used to be a place of a beast folk that were like canine descended, very similar to the like Antiqua, and they were killed off in the Nahatan flu, which spread out of Black Marsh and did damage all over Tamriel. But in Black Marsh, it killed off any non-Argonian race of intelligence. There were some wild folk humans, as well as these Lilmoth and some elves that were living in Black Marsh at the time. All of them were wiped out by the Nahatan flu. And some people think that it's because the Hist either created the flu or warned the Argonians of how to deal with the flu. But Argonians are already resistant to disease anyway, so they may have just been immune to it.
Yeah, they were just lucky in that. What I find interesting is you have the word Gideon and like almost like Archon there, so an association with not only a plague killing other people off, like in the Black Death, but also with reptilian and archontic type of things as well. And another interesting thing I came to find out about the Argonian connection there. I know this is a slight diversion from Tiber Septim, but there was a race I ran into, an actual galactic race at one point, that I only remembered this recently. They called themselves the Triform Elementals, and these guys, they didn't look anything like Argonians. They looked like the Ferengi from Star Trek a little bit. They had smaller ears, and they had kind of like a cow-like appearance in the face a little bit, and they had like this avatar that would talk to you. The representatives, had weird names like Linktar Delta or something Alpha or Beta. They had these weird
Mm-hmm.
like
Yeah, the
names.
Argonians have like hyphenated names a lot of the time, like walks in shadow for like an assassin type Argonian, or heals with poultice, something like that would be like a healer name in the Argonian culture.
Yeah, and these people had something very similar to that, and they also had like a hist-like connection too. There was like this green-like energy that always surrounded them all the time, and it kind of was almost like if you would think of it as almost like an oversoul separated version of their members were almost like avatars in a way, and it was weird because it was like how the Argonians have their relationship to the hist, and it's the same type of thing, and it was an elemental form. It was like a dyadic type form or dyadic consciousness branch off. But these particular beings would come through mirrors. Luckily, at the time, we had like a Dreamcatcher mirror, which you can't find these anymore. Which it negates any negative magic that would come through a mirror if you do this really strange Dreamcatcher formation on mirrors. And these beings would constantly get caught in it, kind of like a bug in a spider web or fly in a spider web. And the mist that was surrounding them it couldn't speak properly on its own. It needed its avatar component.
Mm-hmm.
But each person had their own consciousness and they were their own soul. But it was they had the same relationship than the Argonians had to the Hist, and it was the same type of
So they,
relative
so
relationship.
these beings relied on this energy for everything, basically.
Yeah, they relied on it for pretty much everything, and if they were to be cut off from it, they would die essentially. And essentially, also in Star Trek Voyager, there was another species they ran into in the Delta Quadrant where this other Federation ship found these beings that would come from this dimensional space they relied on for the same thing. They cut one of them off from it mistakenly, and the being died within like 10 seconds. So it was, or not even that, it was like 5 seconds. So it was the same kind of relationship those beings had with their dimension that the Argonians have to the Hist. It was the same type of example. Also, with what I find interesting is with the Empire, it's Odin said this to us on one of the recent GIC episodes we did, following the other Tiber Septim episode you and I did. Was that same week we recorded this, where he came through and said in the beginning he did the same thing as Tiber Septim, where he would go around and conquest the 9 realms to try to unify essentially the known creation at the time, and that you had the different territories. There were moons and planets around Asgard, and also dimensional spaces. But you have like the 9 territories, and also now you have the 9 divines, and you have also also all these other channels that are false channels, like the Palladian Council of 9. You see the Egyptian Council of 9. You see all that pop up too. You see the number 9 pop up repeatedly. But with Odin specifically, some of this was based on his conquest of the 9 realms. Is what he pretty much told us. How he had to negotiate with different territories and how he just outright conquered other ones. It's the same also, in the Marvel version of him, you see in Thor Ragnarok, where he had gone around with Hela and conquered 9 realms. He said it was similar to that. He said similar to that mixed with this. And also, one other point is you notice that the Empire's retracted back a little bit in the times of Skyrim. And there's very much the same way in the real Roman Empire, where a lot of the resources dwindle and they had to retract their territory back a bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's the same way. Yeah. It's pretty much the same. So I didn't mean to interrupt you, but that's
Oh,
what came
yeah.
to me. Yeah.
You're all good. So to get into the Owlsvare conquests, they're trivial at best. Um, Personally, it is believed that as soon as the Empire started amassing forces along the borders, what had happened was there were a few border conflicts, then the local uh, uh, Khajiit forces were just absolutely obliterated, and the main, who rules, is their basically the spiritual leader of the Khajiit people, just made an agreement and it was brought in fairly simply. Valenwood, Valenwood at this time had also had some issues with the Old Mary Dominion government back and forth, like the Dominion government that's based in Somerset, because Sylvanar is the actual capital of the Old Mary Dominion at this time, but the government of Somerset and them were having disagreements. Basically, we don't know. This is happening at the same time as the stuff for Morrowind, so we're going to talk about one first, and then the other one I'm just going with Valenwood. Valenwood was just basically, uh, it was because it had lost the help from the Somerset Isles. The Legion exploited the Green Pact to force the Bosmer to capitulate by essentially wasting soldiers who had done wrong in the past. By sending legions that were not as reputable in, allowing them to be killed. Because now this is how I believe it happened. There's not much writing as to how it happened, but this is the most logical way to beat the Bosmer in Valenwood, at least. So the Green Pact specifies that within 3 days of a kill, it needs to be eaten by the Bosmer. So, and that includes people and other Bosmer. That includes any living creature that's like not a tree, because they're not. The Green Pact also says you can't cut down trees, you can't harm nature. And if you do, you have to eat it within 3 days. So if you send in lower performing legions, legions with bad reputation, they get killed. Now they're eating the dead. You can kill them while they're forced to eat. Um, and that's how I believe it happened. There's not much writing about it because this would be a very gruesome conquest. We know that the Bosmer can do the wild hunt type thing where they'll turn into monstrous forms that are ravenous. We don't. There's no writing that it happened at this period, so I don't believe it happened. But yeah, the Bosmer were a darker part of the conquest, if that's what we like mean to say. Now we'll move to Morrowind. Morrowind, as I've said, was suicide. It was viewed as suicide by every projection that Tiber Septim's people ran. Somerset is off the coast. It's also viewed as suicide just because it's off the coast, and some of the best mages ever live there. And the High Elves believe themselves to be over humanity, and they wouldn't want to capitulate to a human government. So two fanatic elven provinces. Luckily, they're not near each other. The Morrowind is more fanatic than Somerset. Let's be straight up. The people of the Dark Elves in Morrowind are religious, racist zealots that believe the tribunal at this time, hands down, except for the Ashlanders who still believe in the Daedra, and their Daedric connection is still very strong. And also would not want an imperial government because famously the Imperials ban worship of Daedra wherever they go. So Morrowind is fanatically against them for religious reasons, as well as the fact that the Dunmer are notoriously racists. And it is but Vivek knows, and the tribunal know, that if the Empire invades, they're still going to lose a very large portion of their population. And this will be a war that'll go on for centuries. And so Vivek and Tiber Septim meet on the borders, and hash out a deal. And so this is we've met Vivek. We've talked about him many times. But Vivek and Tiber Septim meet, and it's said that this is like a hush hush meeting that they did, that most people don't know this is happening. Likely the other members of the tribunal know that this is happening. Tiber Septim knows that this is happening. That's it. Tiber Septim's government doesn't know that this is happening, but a deal is struck. And the deal is that the Empire can come in, and Morrowind will be seen kind of as a colony. The Imperials can man forts in certain areas. They can have their gods there. They can do, but they're not in control of everything, as they would be in other areas. Their officials are only officials over the colonial towns and cities of set for Imperial citizens. So Dharma societies will still have their leaders, though the settlements set up by the Empire are allowed to be ran by Imperial leadership. And there's another trade-off made, and that is to do with the religious issue of Morrowind. And Vivek is very wise here. He doesn't allow them to ban his religion, the religion that worships him, the Tribunal Temple, and he protects the Daedra worship. He just says Morrowind will be a free religious zone. They can worship, you can worship whatever you want there, and Imperial citizens who want to worship me and Imperial citizens that want to worship the Daedra, they can all come here. We're still going to have our religious issues within Morrowind of Daedra, non-Daedra, and then we're going to add the Imperial cults and the Imperial gods, which will further compound this issue. But this is how it's going to be. And Tiber Septim agrees if he can get the Numidium. Now, the Numidium still was in Red Mountain at this point, and had no power source. Famously, the Numidium is the brass god of the Dwemer that the Dwemer were trying to use to become a soul consciousness creature of higher spiritual. Basically, they're trying to turn themselves into gods with it. And then they famously disappeared, which means when they disappeared, they zero summed because they realized that everything, they basically viewed it as nothing that they do matters because they're in a fake universe. And so they willed themselves out of existence. But he gets the physical being, the Numidium. Now, this is a thing from the Elder Scrolls Online, I think, where I don't know what happens. I haven't played the Elder Scrolls Online this part yet because it costs money, and I don't have that kind of money to be paying for it right now, and I don't have the time to play it. So, yeah, but it's from the Elder Scrolls Online. But yeah, that's the Numidium, and he gets it. And then he tasks. So Morrowind is now incorporated, but again in partnership. And he tasks his Imperial battle mage, Zurin Arctis, to get the thing running. Because he's going to use it to invade Somerset. So Zurin Arctis is working on it. They create the Mantello, which is basically a giant soul gem. And the Mantella is. And then they need to find a soul worth filling it with. And there's a few kind of souls that they may have used. One of them is Zurin Arctis. The other one is our old friend Nifilo Argus. And then the other one is the Under King at the time, who is Ysmir Wolfhearth. There's no definitive answer. A lot of people think, though, that it is Zurin Arctis himself who becomes the soul that powers the Numidium. So the Underking in Daggerfall is Ysmir Wolfhearth or Zurin Arctis. And it's kind of iffy. It may have just been Zurin Arctis's like life force that was used, because in that game he's kind of like this decrepit creature, and I don't perfectly remember exactly how he got that way, but basically, then the Numidium is used to drown Somerset in its own blood. It is absolutely ravaged by the Numidium and the Imperial Legion invasion. The Numidium is then broken up. Its shell is sent to High Rock. The Mantella is also in High Rock, but like left deep underground in a very dark place. It's broken up. It's rendered inert until the events of Daggerfall. But now Tiber Septim rules over an empire that encompasses all of Tamriel. The first time ever. No empire had fully conquered everything until now. Solstheim itself came in fairly either with Morrowind or Skyrim. Dros Mackay came in with Hammerfell. Most of these islands came in randomly. This island is came in with Morrowind, so everything is Imperial now. Well, at least Imperial Empire government run or controlled. Now, that doesn't mean that there's not going to be civil wars. There's not going to be problems going forward. But right now, it has all got the the dragon banner of the Empire flying over it. The Imperial Legion now sets out to maintain this empire. And to do so, they man the forts that are already around all over. A lot of them that were built under the Reman Empire or used under the period during the Alliance War era and during the Akaviri invasions of the second and late first eras. A lot of these fortresses are still standing, but not in great shape. They repair them and then man them themselves, and the Empire uses them mostly to stop banditry, as well as to minimize, to work on like road taxes, that kind of stuff, like control trade. In some places, like in Morrowind, forts are surrounded by small settlements. In Skyrim, they kind of just control regions. They control passes in the mountains and stuff. But all over, the Imperial Legion is now manning forts. They also set up Imperial Legionary camps to deal with more localized threats like bandits, beasts, that kind of thing. Camps like this would also be set up in areas of current conflict. Say a local ruler isn't willing to capitulate or is trying to break away, they would set up camps like this within smaller areas to help pacify that area. It's seen in Skyrim, famously during the Civil War, where Imperial camps are behind enemy lines and used to kind of coordinate tactical strikes on settlements and fortresses. Um, so yeah, the Empire is at this point well established, is setting up these Imperial Legion manned areas all over to really control this and put down a lot of the issues that spring up during the conquest because the legions weren't focusing on policing. The legions now go from a wartime conquesting force to a lot of guards. The legions famously make up a large portion of the guard population all over the empire, as well as just ensuring that the countryside is as pacified as possible. And to that end, also now the Elder Council takes up its role as basically the government outside of the Emperor himself. So the Emperor himself will do the big picture stuff. The Elder Council control most of the smaller details, and they will be made up of members from all over the Empire, and their counselor, who will basically be the second in command of the Empire, always. And that's Counselor Alcado during the events of Oblivion, who at that time is technically the leader of the Empire. And I don't know why in Oblivion they never show any of the other people on the Elder Council. They just show him. he's the only person in that big room. But yeah,
I noticed that. Yeah.
um, the orcs will later on set up Orsinium again, and they will not fully be brought into the Empire until the events of Daggerfall, when they, when Orsinium kind of joins through the Dragon Break period. They come in through the Dragon Break because Orsinium isn't viewed as like a state until then. It's viewed as kind of a rebellion. There are orcs in the Legion at this time because orcs have the whole stronghold culture. So stronghold orcs that aren't willing to challenge their father for control of the stronghold or just leave the stronghold for any reason usually join the legions just because their military prowess will be well used there. But yeah, the orcs are the sole exception basically at this point. In fact, some cultures don't even view them as civilized at this point, but we can talk about
Yeah,
that
more
later.
barbaric. Yeah, more barbaric. Yeah.
But yeah, so Tiber Septim is now controlled of the Empire. He lives for 108 years beyond and dies. And we will talk about how his ascension to divinity happens in the next episode.
This is actually interesting. You know, if you also what I find interesting, I'm looking at like the different names of the different like the different cities and stuff like that that elves control. You know, and stuff like that, or relatively how the map is set up and how also Odin was describing how when he went to war with the dark elves and everything, the real ones, and with the frost giants and all this other stuff where essentially he was battling the servants or the direct uh, groups of Orions, essentially. And uh, that's where also, of course, you have the breakaway, which were the Tuatha De Danann, and they ended up being just fine, even though they, if you were looking at Fomorian and Tuatha, you wouldn't necessarily always be able to tell the difference. They kind of look similar. But then you have the Fomorians that were more white elf, like in the movie Hellboy and the Golden Army, or you have the snow elves in Skyrim when you do the Dawn Guard quests. But what I find interesting is that it's mirroring a lot of the stuff Odin said he had to do during the times post destruction of Asgard, during destruction and post. The original Orion Stage One, as I like to call them, essentially look like white elves, even though they are a mutation from a parallel universe of ourselves and Asgardian genome, and that would be essentially Nibiru from their parallel universe. The stage ones, the decrepit or decrepit type ones, were like the sorceress in Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, where it's the witch with the apple type of thing. Think Fomorian, you're thinking that. Well, that's essentially a great example of this. You have also what I find very interesting, and a lot of people don't know this part. You have the war with the Fomorian wars with the Tuatha De Danann and the Fomorian wizards and such, and you got humans that were caught in the middle. You have eventually you have the Tuathans before they left after some of the humans wanted to push them out. History says that the Tuathans got murdered by the upcoming Irish people later. That's wrong. Some did. Some were caught off guard in the British Isles by barbaric humans that basically shoved axes in the backs of their skulls. You see the long-headed skulled people that have axe wounds in the back of their head. Some were caught off guard. Some tried to set up a system of government where you had a system of here, yours, mine, theirs type of system where okay, you own this property, you own this property, we have this council of people, etc., etc. The Tuatha tried to help establish that after the Fomorians, the rules started to fade a little bit. The humans didn't necessarily wanted that. Some of the humans wanted everything, so the elves left them to it. With this, what I find interesting is you have like some kind of like a biblical name, like Gideon, for instance, or you have like references to archontic type of words like archon or arcan in Black Marsh. You have black light, anything that is like anything kind of black related over here, dark elf. You have it kind of over here. And what I'm getting at is the Tuathans made this pact with some of the humans saying, do not give in to any sort of Orion influences throughout history. They didn't put into account that eventually the Inquisition would come around much later in history, thousands of years later. and people that were their descent lineages would end up getting incorporated into the church, both Tuatha and human hybrid lineage.
Mm-hmm.
And that started to, with that indoctrination, started to corrupt some of that genetic memory. Within that genetic memory is where you get people that call themselves natural witches. They're essentially a hybridic grouping between Tuatha De Danann and human. And when you incorporate an indoctrinative program into that DNA, it takes multiple generations to work that virus out of the DNA. And I have a friend that he had children that, that some of the grandparents were wanting to incorporate into Catholicism and into Catholic Church. And it's because that lineage, also involving my own lineage, I found that him and I are related. Whereas I was objecting to this, but I didn't realize my soul and my genetic memory was upholding the original Tuatha pact. What happened was the family had to hide within Christianity to avoid the Inquisition, so they became Christian. So from pagan to Christian. So this, why I bring this up is in Odin's time and in the Tuathan time, it was more black and white. It was more like, okay, these guys were the enemies. Okay, these guys need to be wiped out. We need to fortify the empire. And further back, it was fortify the 9 realms away from Orion rule or influence, even in those times. Eventually, of course, Asgard fell in the Ragnarok rock that we mentioned in GIC. But what I'm trying to get at is this seems to be kind of mirroring this, also the racism of the Dark Elves. This is how a lot of them are. Some of the Syrian groups and Dark Elf groups that are related, and also the Lancaneer, White Elf type and Grayish Elf type groups. Racist as holy hell. They, and also some of these reptilian groups that are more white supremacist type groups. You have the ones that worked with Hitler, which are the Aldebaran Nordic. Orion have some little bit of reptilian in them as well. They're the blonde hair, blue eyed types. Racist as holy hell. All these groups are related to one another. That's where you got Hitler and his ideals. You have the Darshinian Nazi type group that shared the same symbol, the reverse swastika. They shared this with Hitler, helped Hitler out to start his war machine, along with their Orion forebears. There is a base on the border of Poland and Germany, I believe, where the Nazi war machine got started. I don't remember the name of it, but it's in the shape of a W. That is the symbol of Cassiopeia. They were telling this group where to dump some of the munitions and some of the components where they could produce weapons. This is how the Nazis got involved. Also, what I find interesting is the Numidium is depicted as a big mech, like transformer, essentially.
Yeah, it's like a Megazord.
Yeah, and you see in like the Transformers, or you see like series as like Gundam Wing or Voltron or something like that. You see these mechanized suits, and you see also in Nazi sometimes fictional writings that are out there that they had also some of these mechanized suits. So if you link also the darker side of this invasion with some of the Nazi conquests too, like how the adventure the Germans became. There's somebody's trying to say in there the link between Nordic and Nazi, and that is absolutely true. Hitler believed the German people descended from Atlantis. So that's what that technology is depicting, is that. And we also have said in previous episodes where Atmora and Atlantis were the same thing with Asgard. So there is unfortunately a dark thread that Odin was talking about, that eventually this other thread became what we know of as the Third Reich much later in history. And this is what he was getting at. So they're basically showing both sides here. And he also explained the Dragon Break was a real event on Atlantis, whereas there was a device that was set off that fractured time. And he said this is how that other version of Atlantis came to be that was untouched, because there was the one that failed and the one that was untouched. So you have a quantum state, both is and isn't. And that's how he said that happened. So that and the conjunction of the spheres from Witcher also was a real event associated with the Ragnarok as well, and the breakdown of the Bifrost. So this is what I find fascinating with the parallels with history of the Elder Scrolls. And somebody is telling this story in a way that is more palatable to people. Also, I found that the Numidium and the Ark of the Covenant were essentially the same thing, even though one looks like a box, one's a big mechanized droid, basically, but or mech. But the thing of it is, I was told that also there were power sources like that inside of other mechanized robots like Talos. Think of Talos, the robot on the Isle of Crete in Greek mythology.
Hmm.
That was essentially supposed to be a mechanized suit that protected the Isle of Crete. And named Talos, it's associated. Oh, they're associating them together. They're associating Tiber Septim, which becomes Talos. Which what does he use to basically beat the crap out of the elves? Big mechanized suit. And I was told inside there would be like a basically would be a tesseract, or essentially a cube. That's the same with the Ark of the Covenant that Enlil I found out used on the walls of Jericho in the past, as basically under the name Yahweh. But that was still essentially Enlil. He was the god of the Old Testament, and essentially the Old Testament belonged to Enlil at that point. Anu or Odin was his father. So that, and also Enlil in, you go into the Scandinavian myth, eventually became Loki. So so this is how everything kind of mirrors itself there. But with the comparison to the robot is, or this mechanized person, or in also the old Clash of the Titans movie, it was this big statue that came to life and had lava as a lifeblood. But with this, it was more like a box that was in the center that was a tesseract, kind of like the tesseract cube in the Marvel movies with the Infinity Stone in the center. Same difference. That's essentially the Numidium, and it's also essentially the power source for the Ark of the Covenant. That box that was inside the Ark of the Covenant could have been put in a mechanized robot. I was told the power source that was within that was essentially the light of a dying star. That qualifies it as essentially nuclear fusion. So, uh, or some kind of decaying star matter, or an inverted singularity or black hole type power source. So, this mixed with the ability to fracture time. If you were to fire this off, you would create a quantum state between is and is not. So, the like just essentially the same as the Dragon Break. And causing weird, ill Mandela effect type of things. You're dealing also with the Orions that also fractured space time and multiversal physics, violated every form of multiversal physics just to tear through time space. Um, and it is a violation because it causes incursions in other universes, just like in the multiverse of madness. So it fractures things that have to be healed. There was also a group of elf-looking beings that I saw. They called themselves the Guardianship. They live in a space in between. They were warning me that they had to keep balance in the multiverse. That the multiverse of madness is an entire show in and of itself, and people will probably want to shoot me in the head after I've explained the multiverse physics for the umpteenth time. Uh, but this is where I'm at with this. This is Odin came in and explained some of this. If people want to review Galactic Interstellar Council, where we talked about the Valhalla entrapment, go to galacticinterstellarcouncil.com. That's where that is, and also the link to Mars as well, being the being essentially Valhalla, essentially is what it was. So or that bubble they're in. So I'll see if I was also stretching this out a bit to see who was actually here as well. I was looking around at the same time I was talking. So um, let me see here. I sense a multitude of presences here today. It's a large group. I know there's protection for this conversation because since we're comparing it to actual galactic history. Bum, 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 bum. I sense Odin's presence, but I don't think he's going to be the one talking. Let's see here. I sense both masculine and feminine presence here. Isaac, you're there, but you're not the one talking today. Uh, no, you're not. Okay. Can you focus in on who's there? This retrograde energy is horrid. So let's okay. Excuse me, who's there, please? I have to be able to see you. Can you come in a little better, please, if you would? Uh, I'm sensing Elaine and Vess's presence as well. Correct? Okay. Yeah. All right. There's two of you. I can't exactly channel both of you at the same time. So, no, I'm not going to attempt that either. No. All right. Let's see. Which one of you? Elena, you want to speak. All right. True benevolent Elena only, and no conflicting agendas, please. There's also a negative force off this way. I'm sensing Syrian and Dark Elf presence as well. Um, so Odin, if you benevolent Odin, if you are present, I can send you overseeing this conversation. So if you could please keep the that Orion Elven group at bay, that would be great. I just heard absolutely. All right. He's under more legislation now than he was in the times of Asgard, that he has to deal and negotiate with more groups, like you saw in where Tiber Septim had to negotiate with groups versus conquer them. Uh, but in this, he still has control of Asgard and various areas too. So, okay. Uh, yes, I know, Elena. I'll shut up so you can talk. All right. They're worse than Isaac when it comes to the sarcasm, so and the dirty jokes and whatnot. So yeah, all right, better. I know. You can come through the crystal, please. It's no offense to them, but I'm not sure what they have to do with the Tiber Septim conversation, but we'll find out. All right.
Oh, my shoulder.
Yeah, that was weird energy. Yeah. Hello. Yes, that momentary dislocative feeling is because of the resistance to this conversation. This oh, this is actually history that you are seeing within the Elder Scrolls series that they did not, the bad guys did not want compared to the real galactic history and compared to your living history within, say, the Roman Empire or some of the more barbarian tribes as they were seen as. This is what is making them angry and the air full of friction, as it were. We are actually pushing through not necessarily any ionics disturbances like storms like we would normally have to do. We're utilizing, yes, his orgone pieces outside, but also pushing through some psychic fog that is actually hitting this property at this time. And some of the other little annoyances and interferences like you saw off a recording. Me and Vesa, even though we were not present at these events, they are widely known galactically. The Cassiopeian system, for instance, originally had its own set of, uh, say, you would say there were provinces, but they were their own planets. One became more separatist, like how Mars was for this system. Eventually, the Cassiopeian coalition essentially became part of more Galactic Federation territory. Odin refused to become part of this. And the Orions that broke into the system wanted to conquer his empire and his conquests, and eventually got to him mentally. They conquered him very much like he wanted to forge the Nine Realms. It was more of a, you would say, tit for tat in that particular way. Your character of Tiber Septim is very not unlike how Odin was. And here's the kicker in this. Even though Zeus was his essentially his son in this, or Enki, you would think that the murdering of, say, Kronos, for instance, was the murdering of Odin. No, the story got screwed up here. This is essentially Tiber Septim wanting to basically, essentially cutting his own throat in the story you were saying. And some people believe he killed his former mentor, now, or his king. Yes, this is essentially what would have taken place. This is why it is unclear in that story, because it was unclear in galactic history. When essentially Odin figured out his own father was actually succumbing to certain, let's just say, mutative influences. He actually had to destroy his own father, very much like in the Zeus having to destroy Kronos and go after the Titans, even though that's a totally different story. The war between Olympus and the Titans, they got fused. In this, the beginnings of Tiber Septim are no different in that respect. That may seem like a minor detail, the reason they are building off of that and saying it is unclear is because the real history is also equally as unclear and fallen into two types of mythology. His own son, though, also fell into a dark period as well. As he felt he had to basically form his own council and hedge bets on the existence of mankind. And Lil did no differently in that way. Essentially, Poseidon. This is how some of the history went. It is starting to affect us a little, so we can go into questions if you like.
Okay. So these galactic history version of the events depicted in the Elder Scrolls has to do with the resistance to the Orions and the setting up of like the Maldekian sphere of influence.
That is correct. Yes, it is a nearly direct mirror of those events. Yes.
Okay, and so Odin was also forced to make dealings with various groups that he brought in that were not conquered through force, and the ones that were they more likely to join the Orions later on, or were they resolute in the defense against them once they realized the threat that they were?
Was a little of both, actually. There were some groups that were fully engrossed with Orion servitude, which is some of the Dark Elves and Syrian groups. Odin recognized this and began to wipe them out, the Frost Giants being the same. Some of these which are still around in various groups. The Syrians, of course, are under Mount Shasta and unfortunately parts of Mount Adams and some of California. They were the descendant lineage of the royalty from Lemuria when they conquered those areas. You see, it was a tit for tat in those areas. When Odin recognized even a glimpse of servitude towards the Orions, he attempted to wipe them out. It frustrates him to no end now that he cannot do some of the same, because now he has to be in full negotiation mode with a lot of these different groups. Back then, it was only with a few. Now it's with all of them. So this frustrates the holy hell out of him, unfortunately.
Okay. And did these agreements create a stable kingdom, or was there always a sense that it was on edge to falling apart?
It's actually a little both. Some were stable, others were tenuous at best. Some did not want to be under rule, but they also recognized the stability of having an empire. It's very much like when the British conquered India and when the British were driven out by Gandhi and his people, how it then fell into instability afterwards. These other groups recognized that they did not want this to happen. Different religions, very much like with your Vivek, for instance, allowing the different religions, there were certain agreements that were made, certain religious rites were kept. That is a true event that was depicted. Whereas Odin had to negotiate with these particular groups, knowing that if he withdrew or if he was kicked out in some way, it would go back into a dark ages of religious wars, very much like your Hindu and Muslims in India at that time, post British withdrawal. And this is why they assassinated Gandhi, because he was attempting to unify them and keep them unified and independent. They knew that the stabilizing arm of Odin, very much like the Empire, would keep stability, very much like your Roman Empire. When it fell completely, there hence came the Dark Ages. This is why eventually things were rebooted later on a little bit in history, and hence you have the Renaissance. So
Okay.
this later on, much later on in history, I should say, in the uh, the times of Odin. These other groups knew unequivocally, even though they didn't sometimes care for the Asgardians. They knew that they needed them around. They knew they needed the stability of the Bifrost, just like with the Toroth, for instance. They were partially resistant to Asgardian entrenchment, but at the same time, they were also partially pacifistic and would not fight against them. They created a partnership. Others were, let's just say, a little miffed at their presence, both on the Asgardian side and on the Toroth side. And you've sensed this in other session fragments before, whereas then the Orions, from their mental influence, tried to tear those alliances apart, them being as tenuous as they were. You see what I'm getting at? Yes.
Yeah, they picked at the weak points.
Yes.
The so Odin's kingdom, we haven't heard as much as there like the actual evidence, like the talk about how it was in practice has been very little uh, up to this point. Would Odin's kingdom have been, in a way, like how I described the ruling of the Empire of Tamriel, where there were large portions where he had final say, but much of it was run by by a council of leadership taken from areas all over and made up of Odin's family itself.
Yes, you are correct in that Odin wanted to oversee the entirety of this, but as one ruler, he could not see everything. So he needed members of his family to go out and become those liaisons. Unfortunately, a couple of his sons were more susceptible to influence. You would know them as Loki and Thor, or Michael and Lucifer. So this is essentially how that went down. They became susceptible to the fight and the fighting each other, and became the symbols of that division, even though this was not intended by Odin himself. Even though essentially it was supposed to symbolize good versus evil, this is not how it began. The expansiveness of the Asgardian, or you call it the Maldekian Empire, needed other people to form a council, or at least the eyes and ears of Odin. Odin was the final say. It's very much like your King Arthur and the Round Table. This is why you saw the Round Table with the Empire. You see, this is also what they were hinting at. They had to have them all be equals, but Arthur was the final say. You see,
Mm-hmm.
and this is how Odin had to run things after a while.
Okay, that's what I had thought because I have memories of being one of these counselors that went out to check on different areas that were loyal to the state.
Yes, indeed, you were there in your soul history, especially with the negotiations with the Toroth and their planet of Cadenum. This this is where you and Tyr were at most odds with some of the Toroth intentions, and the Toroth were also tenuous with Odin's intentions. It was basically a razor's edge or a powder keg that could explode at any moment.
Yeah, I also have memories of dealing with the Intumbans as well as um, the Tartesians on Earth.
Yes, you are correct. You helped negotiate a lot of these different treatises, but at the same time, Odin was in the his rule was law mode. Let's just put it.
Mm,
So eventually, he did get what he wanted.
yeah, I have more memories of negotiations turning into conquests.
Yes, you are absolutely correct. This is why he was referring to Thor Ragnarok being fairly accurate as far as the conquests went. The negotiations did work. There were trade agreements made, but in the end, Odin wanted one territory.
Hmm. I understand that. So with the Toroth connection and how were brought in, they the rub with me and them it comes from that time. But does they still view it their own stuff as they allowed the Orions in, if I remember correctly, and now they try to make up for it. Do they recognize the fact that they were they can't hold themselves as accountable because they were already in a negative situation.
Yes, they are attempting to make up for this because they let them through, thinking that the energy eventually would convert and save the day. Yes, their harmonics did fix things in history, just like they tried to undo some of Enlil or Loki's shenanigans in your biblical history. Within the Jesus time frame, for instance, they attempted to add their coding into that aspect of Enlil to try to tip the scales. Sometimes their interference helped, sometimes it did not. They wanted to become more active on Earth, so they had incarnated liaisons to essentially insert different harmonics and codes throughout history. This is how they are attempting to make up for that. The Mozen and other groups as well. That was basically like a Cassiopean coalition at the time, or the group that I'm related to, the Serranos. They were named slightly different then, and they were also attempting to hold the line with Galactic Federation ideals and Asgardian treatises, you see. And eventually, the Cassiopean coalition later on, eventually you could call it by that name from this point forward. It has a name that is unpronounceable by people at this point, or humans at this point, because other aliens are involved with the naming, unfortunately, within the Galactic Federation ideals. The Cassiopean coalition took the side eventually of the Galactic Federation, and Odin was, let's just say, less than pleased, and so were his Asgardian liaisons, because he was attempting to create his own federation or empire instead of having any form of fascism. It was essentially more of a form of fortification. At least this is how Odin viewed it. This was also some of your rub with the Mozen and some of my group, and also eventually the Darshinian Empire that came to power that was very Nazi-like as well.
Okay. And then switching to some of the other races that made up part of Odin's group, I'm assuming that the Intumbans were not fully incorporated, but were an ally.
Mm-hmm.
The
Yes, you
World
are
of
correct.
Wheels was incorporated as a client state that helped with a lot of the tech that was used by Odin's people.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and the Earth Tartesian state was an unhappy client as well. It was one that was very rebellious.
You are correct in this. This is why, after the destruction of Asgard, the Tartessian or Tartarian Empire also started falling into shambles more because they were slightly, let's just say, more influenced to be in a state of anxiety. It was slightly tenuous, but it was a at least partially stable worldwide empire. This is why you see similar structures in different parts of the globe.
Okay, thank you for your time, and I will ask you the one question that I ask at the end of these, which is if you were going to play through a game right now, what race would you play as?
Me personally, I would still remain as a female character. I would either have to play through as as a Khajiit warrior, or as essentially a Bosmer or Elven type character.
Okay, thank you for your time.
Yes, thank you. That was a little rough for her to try to come in like that. I was starting to get my eyes to water and everything. There was this weird friction that was going on. There are other groups that I feel did not want the more tenuousness of the history talked about, the more razor's edge part of the history talked about. I think some people wanted, or some beings wanted it to seem more stable than it was.
Hmm.
uh, the more of the legendary mythological versus the factual. I feel that that was like, yeah, okay, yeah, this I just got a validation to that. Just some wanted the truth out, while other ones were going, you might want to hold off on that a minute. But that's just how it is with the Galactics. It's either hedge bets the gods, where the negative ones were trying, or some of them were trying to roll the dice on which army would win, or you had the other ones going, let's not tell that one right now. You have those types of groups. Either the
Hmm.
conquest ones or the ones that want to stand back and go, wait a minute. So this is the feeling I'm getting in the energies today. That's why there was such a weird friction between the two, because there's at least 10 different groups, 12 different groups here that wanted to have their piece. And I feel the Toroff are present as well. I haven't sensed them in a very long time. Do either you want to speak on this at all, or are you just observing? You do not wish to speak at this time. Or is this LaRoche that I'm speaking to? Toroff LaRoche? Thank you. All right. All right. Uh, are you sure you don't want to say anything?
They don't
Because,
wish to speak with me. There's still that rub that they don't want to. They don't want to deal with me.
okay. LaRoche, why don't we settle this now? Agreed. All right. All right. Let's do this. I can do one more. All right. LaRoche, make it quick, please. All right. Uh, there's at least a dozen or 2 dozen Toroff with you here. I can see them. So, whoa, you're strong. Okay. Okay. There we are. LaRoche, if you would, please. Indeed. Yes, this is Toroff LaRoche. I indeed was present at those times, and my people were present at those times. We did have much to make up for. This is true. We were abhorrent to some of the violent acts, but we did not completely always realize that we were being controlled to not lend defense. In those times, I and others, the one that eventually called eventually the incarnation of Marilyn Monroe when she spoke that time, she was part of those times. His brain is not retaining names at this time of those because of the frequency differentials involved in this. We attempt to do a more, what we thought a spiritual superior route at the time. This clashed with Odin's ideals of what, as the Asgardian Nine Realms Empire looked like. This caused a tenuous relationship when he saw things as more of defense and we saw things as an affront to spiritual superiority. This is the rub you are picking up on. Do you have questions for me at this time?
No, I have. Uh, the rub I feel is that you wouldn't get off your high horse.
You are correct in this. This is what my people have had to make up for ever since. What you call a spiritual high horse or egotistic, let's just say, throne or crown of importance. You are correct in this. We thought ourselves superior to that of what we thought was Asgardian barbarism. This essentially was our mistake. And I am here at this point, yes, to resolve and this, as he calls it, the stone smashing of the karmic issue and bring resolution to us all here. This is also would cause rubs with any incarnated brethren of mine currently. This, I believe, I hope in this way begins to bring resolve to any attitudes on all sides that are of a high horse type nature. Is this acceptable?
I can forgive your past transgressions. I can't forget them.
It's
That
this
is
is acceptable. Yes,
that
this
is
is
where I'm at.
this is a normal response, and this is something that we too are in this agreement. So, not in a contractual way. I am just saying in a resolutionary sort of way, resolution sort of way. So this is where I will close this conduit. But this is what I wish to accomplish today. This is as you would say, a long and winding road ahead, but we are perfectly willing to capitulate and negotiate with other groups, just like Odin has had to do. So this, I believe, has balanced out both ends from more of our high horse or conquistadoric type of tendencies. So thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, oh, he was uncomfortable. All right. He was extremely uncomfortable. So,
Well, I was uncomfortable as well. There's clearly, I think there's a bit more to that story that that doesn't need to be told, but that I
uh-huh.
feel is more
Yeah, me too.
something to do with them and their, like, it was like me and Tia were there and it didn't, and they blatantly just said no,
Mm-hmm.
and that's why it
Yes,
was like,
because yeah.
I think that's why I chose, like, you need to get off your high horse. It was like, well, this is for the greater good of everyone, and you're just not doing it.
Yeah, they didn't believe also one among them was a traitor, and then Tyr found the traitor, killed the traitor, and then the Torop didn't believe until there was proof found. So it was
Hmm.
like, yeah, so it was that high horse attitude. But yeah, I'm getting a
Yeah.
validation to that. So yeah, yes, thank you, LaRoche, thank you, all of you. Yeah, it's been a long time since I've encountered a Torov. So oof, man, that there was the channel was slightly unstable because of this uncomfortable rub, but I could feel it very thick, very heavily. So this is that's actually decent. So I don't know if you have anything else to add, Ryan, before we take the show out today.
Not today, but thank you for listening to this these events because they were both informative and interesting.
Yes, the same here. Yeah, I didn't expect the Toroff to be present. Isaac acted this morning like there was going to be somebody. He knew somebody that the Toroff was probably going to be present. Also, Elena and Vessa were here. They're having kind of a rub with the Toroff too. And the Cassiopeian groups are having a rub with them too. And I believe there's Asgardians groups. I know Odin's looking from a distance. So, and I see some Viking groups around both sides of ours. So thank you all in attendance, and also thank all of you for watching this episode. Hopefully you enjoyed this. So bye bye, everybody.
Goodbye.
Okay, there's something obvious that I missed that Thorsden had brought up on GIC, this recording on GIC, but I'm adding this to the discussion with me and Ryan, The Life of Talos, Part 2. Instead of Life of Brian, Life of Talos. Anyway, like what I did with our friend Brian, The Forgotten Life of Brian. I did we sometimes play titles, jokes like that. But anyway, the town of Blacklight in Morrowind. Thorsden made an obvious observation that I somehow missed in my downloads, was wiped. Blacklight, Black Sun. Associate that with Dark Elf or Syrian. Associate that with Agartha, Black Sun, or Dual Sun, the SS symbol, or Order of the Black Sun, which then the Nazis had that as their essentially one of their main driving forces. Gideon and Archon, those other two towns that were mentioned in that. Gideon, Bible. Also had to do with culling and overpopulation. If you watch Star Trek, there's this I can't remember the title. Gideon was in the title, where there was a planet of population that was so overcrowded that their aging was slower, but the planet was crowded. They were like shoulder to shoulder, like you'd be in Japan. But they didn't believe in their beliefs were inhibiting them from moving forward and colonizing the stars. And Kirk tried to help them. They wanted to initiate a disease within their population to cull them down. See the thing with the COVID and all this other stuff as well. But you'll see some stuff mentioned in the GIC, regular one and after show this week. But whenever that airs. But then you had Archon that was also mentioned. So 3 points: Blacklight, Gideon, Archon. They had biblical. Also referring to Jesus, also referring to the calling down of that. If you follow Gene Roddenberry, if you add that in there, I don't know if they meant for that part to be added in there, but I feel it's obvious. Gene Roddenberry also talked about God and Bible stuff that to add it into the stories, but then Hollywood wanted to add Satan in there, which they did in Star Trek V. Final Frontier, and also in the animated series with Lucifer being shown as a good guy. Also, Doctor Strange, with the bastardization of the, Father God type name and everything like that. That's typical satanic Hollywood. But then you have Archon, which that's self-explanatory. So that would be Orion, archontic, demonic forces. So there's and also the power of 3, trifecta triangle. Geometry being bastardized, the bastardization of the power of 3, which Orions like to do. With the upside down triangles, and also insectoids use triangular implants. They use geometrical implants on people a lot. And I see holographic implants that are triangles. All forms of triangles. Triangles are the basis and start of geometry. It's 3, not 1, 3. And like Holy Trinity, all of that. So you get the idea of Father, Son, Holy Spirit. So I wanted to clarify that bit of that I apparently missed that Thorsden pointed out in his channel during GIC. So these will probably be put up relatively close to one another. I want to get this stuff up before we move. So I'll end this here, and I just wanted to add that little bit in there. So it is 1:28 p.m. Arizona Standard Time, Sunday, January 15th, 2023. Thank you. What I also meant by them not being allowed to go into the star is the Gideons not being allowed to go into the star, or the residents of Gideon. Also here, overpopulated, using resources. We have to call them down for the balance of nature, like the Guidestone timeline, instead of allowing human colonies, or only DNAs that they want, or what these alien hedge betters want, like with Samson with the Philistines, calling them or getting rid of a strain that the Darshinians didn't want around. That's what also I forgot to add. Also the number 33 hit, which was back biblical number 33, number of Jesus. See how the AI likes to synchronize the numbers. So, and 43 just came up, meaning a 7. So it was a 33 and 11, or 33 and a 7, which 33 is 3 11s. So there you go. Here, it just keeps going since we before Vegas. So it's 1:32 p.m. Arizona Standard Time, Sunday, January 15th, 2023. Thank you.